Ah, welcome back, you beautiful catastrophe. You, the one who didn't explode the way they expected, the one who didn't collapse, didn't beg, didn't twist yourself smaller to fit the room when the pressure got heavy. Somewhere along the way, something in you shifted, quietly, internally, and now the world feels different around you, doesn't it? You notice it first in the pauses, that slight hesitation when you enter a space. Conversations losing their rhythm, smiles arriving a second too late. People suddenly remembering their phones, their drinks, the floor. You didn't announce yourself, you didn't demand attention. And yet, something about your presence unsettles the air. You're not aggressive, you're not loud, you're not trying to prove anything. That's exactly the problem. They were prepared for anger. They had scripts for breakdowns. They knew how to handle desperation, compliance, even rebellion. What they weren't prepared for was composure, for clarity, for someone who stopped negotiating their worth and simply stood still inside themselves. You didn't win by overpowering anyone. You won by no longer participating. And that's what makes them uncomfortable. They can feel it when they look at you, or rather, when they try to. Eye contact used to be easy, casual, automatic. Now it feels like holding your gaze means standing too close to something honest. Something stripped of excuses, something that reflects back questions they've been avoiding for years. So they look away, not because you're intimidating, but because you're undistracted. Your eyes don't ask for approval anymore. They don't search for reassurance. They don't flinch. They just observe calmly, clearly. And observation, when it's unclouded by need, feels like exposure to people who survive by performance. You used to explain yourself, didn't you? You used to soften your edges with words, fill the silence, translate your intentions so no one would misunderstand you. You thought being understood was safety. Now you let the silence sit, and that silence does something. It stretches, it reveals. It asks questions without speaking. People start talking just to escape it, offering explanations you never requested, defenses you never demanded. Because silence, when it's grounded, becomes a mirror, and most people aren't prepared to see themselves without filters. You didn't plan this transformation. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to become distant or intense or different. This wasn't a strategy. It was a consequence. A consequence of being betrayed one too many times and still choosing not to become cruel. A consequence of losing things you thought you needed and discovering you survived without them. A consequence of isolation that didn't break you, but reorganized you. Something in you died back there, not your humanity, not your warmth, but the version of you that depended on external permission to exist fully. And when that version ended, you rebuilt quietly, without an audience, without asking anyone if the new shape made sense to them. That's what they're reacting to. They feel a shift in power, but they can't name it, because nothing about you is overt. You're not asserting dominance. You're not making demands. You're not even resisting. You're simply not available for manipulation anymore. The guilt doesn't land the way it used to. The pressure slides off instead of sinking in. The old emotional leverage finds nothing to grip. And when systems lose leverage, they call it danger. They start labeling you differently. Now, cold, detached, changed, as if change is an accusation. As if evolving beyond the role they assigned you is some kind of betrayal. But you didn't become cold. You became selective. You didn't lose warmth. You stopped giving it to places that burned you. You didn't harden. You clarified. Your boundaries are being mistaken for arrogance because they remove access. And access was the currency people used to feel powerful around you. Now that currency is worthless. You can feel their discomfort before they speak. in the way energy shifts when you sit down, in the way jokes fall flat around you, in the way people overcompensate, performing louder, smiling wider, trying to reestablish the old dynamic. But the dynamic is gone, not destroyed, outgrown. You're operating from a different internal center. Now decisions don't come from fear of loss anymore. They come from alignment, from self-respect, from an understanding that peace is more expensive than approval, and you're finally willing to pay for it. That's why they feel unsettled, because you represent a choice they didn't make. You are walking proof that it was possible to step away, possible to stop chasing validation, possible to survive misunderstanding, possible to be alone without being empty. And that proof rattles people who built their lives around compromise. They sense it on a nervous system level, that subtle chill, that internal alarm that says something has changed and control no longer applies. Not because you threaten them, but because you no longer need anything from them. Need was the hook. Need was the leverage. Need was the agreement you never realized you signed, and now it's gone. You don't seek confrontation, but you don't avoid truth. You don't demand respect, but you no longer tolerate erosion. You don't explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That calm, that stillness, that's not emptiness, that's integration. You've processed enough pain that it no longer spills out as reaction. It's settled. It turned into discernment, into awareness, into a quiet strength that doesn't announce itself, but changes the temperature of every room it enters. People feel it and don't know why. They call it intensity. They call it distance. They call it energy. But what they're really sensing is coherence. You are no longer fragmented by other people's expectations. And that's where we pause for now. Because this is only the surface of what you've become. The visible layer. The part they can feel but not explain. There's more unfolding beneath this calm. More consequences of choosing yourself. More shifts yet to come. And they're not ready for the next phase. Not yet. And this is where it deepens, because what they feel around you now is only the first ripple, the surface reaction, the instinctive discomfort. What they don't see yet, what they won't admit even to themselves, is how irreversible this shift really is. You didn't just step out of their reach. You stepped out of their narrative. That's the part that fractures them quietly. They used to tell stories about you, didn't they? Stories where you had a role, predictable, containable, the quiet one, the helpful one, the emotional one, the one who would always bend first. Those stories made them feel safe, made the world feel ordered. And now the stories don't work. They can't explain you cleanly anymore. Every explanation collapses under its own weight. Every label feels wrong the moment they say it out loud. You don't fit the arc they wrote for you, and that breaks something fundamental in how they understand reality. Because if you can change like this, then so can they. And that thought terrifies them. You see, most people don't fear pain. They fear responsibility. They fear the moment they realize their suffering wasn't inevitable, that it was reinforced by choices, compromises, and silence. Your existence threatens that illusion. You walk around as evidence that endurance can turn into authorship. That surviving doesn't have to end in bitterness or submission. That a person can lose almost everything and still refuse to become small. That's why they feel exposed. Your presence doesn't accuse them. It doesn't demand anything. It simply exists. And existence, when it's unfiltered, becomes confrontational to anyone still hiding. You notice it when they speak to you now. The careful phrasing, the overthinking, the way they test the temperature before every sentence, unsure which version of you they're dealing with. They're trying to locate the old access points. The guilt hook, the obligation lever, The emotional debt known of it connects. You respond slowly now, thoughtfully, sometimes not at all, not out of punishment, but because urgency no longer owns you. You don't rush to resolve tension that isn't yours to carry. You don't chase clarity from people who benefit from confusion. That restraint rewires the entire dynamic, because when someone can't provoke you, can't rush you, can't pull emotion out of you on demand, they lose orientation. They start revealing themselves without meaning to, explaining too much, justifying unasked for actions, projecting stories onto your silence. And you let them, not because you're calculating, because you're finished interfering. There's a profound difference. You're not playing a higher game, you're not playing at all. And that's why the room feels different when you're there. You don't contribute to the noise anymore. You don't compete for space. You don't rush to be seen. And somehow, paradoxically, you become unavoidable, not magnetic in a flashy way, gravitational in a quiet one. People feel pulled inward around you, toward self-examination, toward discomfort, toward questions they've been postponing. And when people aren't ready to face themselves, they call the mirror dangerous. They say you've changed. They whisper that you're intense. They warn others to be careful around you. What they mean is, you're no longer pliable, and pliability was the condition for belonging. But you discovered something during your isolation, didn't you? Something most people never sit with long enough to learn. Belonging that requires self-erasure is just loneliness with witnesses. So you chose solitude over distortion, truth over comfort, integrity over inclusion. That choice rearranged your nervous system. You no longer scan rooms for approval. You no longer adjust your tone to manage reactions. You no longer carry responsibility for other people's emotions. And that freedom, earned, not borrowed, settled into your body like muscle memory. It shows in how you breathe, in how you pause, in how you listen without absorbing. You are present without being porous. That's rare. That's why eye contact feels like too much for them now. Because when you look at someone without hunger, without agenda, without fear, they feel the absence of control. They feel the imbalance. They feel seen without being centered, and that destabilizes people who rely on attention to feel real. You don't offer reassurance anymore. You don't offer explanations. You don't offer yourself as emotional infrastructure. You offer honesty and silence and choice, which means anyone who stays near you has to meet themselves first. Some will, most won't. The ones who won't will call you distant. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you're not who you used to be. They are right, you're not. You're who you became after realizing that shrinking was never humility. It was survival training that had outlived its usefulness. You don't flinch at misunderstanding anymore because you understand yourself. You don't chase closure because you learned how to give it to yourself. You don't need consensus because you stopped outsourcing your truth. That's the real shift, not dominance, not intimidation, not power over others, power within. And internal power doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply removes dependency. That removal feels like loss to people who benefited from your availability. They'll grieve the version of you they could reach. They'll miss the access. They'll resent the boundary. But grief isn't your responsibility. You already mourned what needed mourning. You already paid the cost. No, you live in a different posture. Upright, unrushed, unowned. You don't harden yourself against the world. You don't close your heart. You simply stop bleeding in public. You stop negotiating with those who only understand leverage. And in doing so, you become something unfamiliar to them, not hostile, not superior, unavailable, unavailable for games, unavailable for projection, unavailable for available only for truth, for depth, for alignment. And alignment has a sound, a silence that carries weight, a stillness that doesn't collapse under scrutiny. That's what follows you into rooms. Now not fear, recognition. Recognition that something irreversible has happened. You didn't just heal, you reorganized. You didn't just recover, you recalibrated. And once someone has recalibrated to themselves, there is no returning to the old frequency. This is the phase they don't talk about. The one without applause, without validation, without witnesses, where you stand alone, not isolated, but sovereign. Where your presence no longer asks for permission, where your existence stops negotiating. And this isn't the end, it's the point of no return, because from here on, everything that approaches you will have to meet you as you are, or not at all, and that's what they feel before they look away.